An embodied man is somebody who meets and lives in this world with an open heart. He has the capacity to be in the mind and to utilize his intellect, but he has the capacity to feel life moving through him. To feel life moving through you, you have to have a balance of both masculine presence, direction, and clarity with feminine receptivity, creativity, and intuition. So really an embodied man is integrated between these polarities inside. Mm-hmm. He doesn't grasp for the things that he doesn't already have. What that creates is a really sexy man. It creates a man that's magnetic. Okay. He walks into a room and he's not trying to get anything from anyone, but people are like, wow, there's something about him. What's about him is that he loves himself deeply and completely. And he's not trying to find that new best deal or that next best thing. He's 100% whole and total as he is as a being and doesn't need to have anything from the outside world. Anything else that happens, he celebrates and appreciates. Yeah. That, to me, is the embodiment of healthy masculinity that's actually integrated with femininity.
Welcome to the Heart of Man podcast, a podcast for any man seeking to live in alignment with his deepest core and lead a life of profound meaning and connection. I'm your host, Alex Kleinerman, and I'm here to empower you through transformative conversations, eye-opening insights, and practical wisdom. Join me now as we venture into the heart of man. Let's dive in. Aaron Kleinerman is a transformational Tantric coach, facilitator, speaker, and author of the best-selling book, The Embodied Man. After attending the Marine Academy, his career started off as a licensed merchant mariner, traveling the world, navigating ships, and making a good salary. However, Aaron's life took an unexpected turn when he woke up one day, unable to move on the very same day he was about to embark on another mission. Something within him knew that this wasn't the path laid out for him, encouraging him to take action on the changes asking to be made. Following his intuition, he moved to California to pursue a master's degree in spiritual psychology, leading him down the path of supporting individuals in the areas of transformation and relationships. Transitioning from navigating ships at sea, Aaron has shifted his focus to navigating souls in the realms of love, sex, and leadership. Aaron and I first connected a couple of years ago at one of his men's retreat I participated at, which left a transformational impact on me. In our conversation on this podcast, I explored Aaron's take and insights around men's work, relationship, and sexuality, drawing from the conversations we've had, but also the rich perspectives he provides in his book, The Embodied Man, which I found to be an integrated outline of what it looks like to pursue mastery in all aspects of being a man. The conversation that followed was a fun, deep, juicy, and at times provocative exploration into a wide array of topics, and I can't wait for all of you to listen in. Now, before we begin, a special note to all our listeners. First of all, I want to acknowledge and thank you for getting on this ride with me at the Heart of Man. I deeply love sharing these conversations with all of you and honor you for taking your valuable time to listen into these conversations. And my dearest hope is to be able to reach more people with these messages so they too can receive benefit from these discussions. So here's a gentle reminder of how you can support this mission. The first way is by providing a 5-star rating. And if you're feeling extra generous, taking a moment to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. This not only helps more people discover the podcast, but also gives me the opportunity to reach more amazing guests in the future. The other way you're able to support is by sharing this podcast with your friends or people you believe could benefit from it. So a challenge I'd love to offer is sharing an episode that resonated with you with 5 other people. This would truly mean the world to me. Thank you, and I deeply appreciate you and your support. And now, let's dive into an uninterrupted podcast with Aaron Kleinerman. All right, all you listeners, welcome to another podcast at the Heart of Man. I'm incredibly excited to announce our next guest on the podcast, Aaron Kleinerman. Aaron is a transformational Tantric coach, he's a facilitator, and he's also the best-selling author of The Embodied Man. Initially coming from a maritime military background where he specialized in navigating ships, he now focuses on navigating souls in the realms of love, sex, leadership, all kinds of other realms. So Aaron, I welcome you to the Heart of Man.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, thanks for coming. This was a podcast I was incredibly excited to have. yeah, when I planned this podcast initially like 6 months ago, I knew I wanted to have you on, but you've been traveling for a very long time. So I was like, all right, let's stay patient and let's just wait until this guy is back in Bali and then let's make it happen.
Perfect. Yeah. Great to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming along. I would love to just start off by just giving our listeners a bit of a context of who you are. And the way I would love to frame it is, I would love to hear a bit, what was your journey growing up as a man? And ultimately, how did you get into men's work? Because that was kind of one of the first ways that we connected through your retreat, the initiation journey, a men's retreat. So I'm curious to hear, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up outside of Boston in a kind of small Irish Catholic town where I was the one Jewish kid surrounded by a lot of others that weren't. I'm the youngest of three. I think my journey as a man growing up was witnessing all the things I wish my father would have done. And so many processes and so many things, like the words are long that my father would have said is, "I've got this."
Right.
That was never the case. So when I was 14, I had an experience of counseling my father out of his gambling addiction.
Wow.
2-hour drive from Boston to New Hampshire to visit my sister up at Dartmouth, and something washed over me that just basically convinced him, spoke to his heart, that said, "Hey, Dad, like, you're losing all your money to gambling. Like, maybe you shouldn't do that anymore." And now, I just turned 40 this year. So this last year. So what was that, 25 years later? He hasn't gambled a day since.
Wow, that's
so
incredible.
that was a changing moment for me in terms of, being a man in this world and growing up quite quickly. I think that's probably a big highlight of my youth, was growing up quite quickly and learning how to navigate life a little bit earlier than I wanted to. And having one of my best friends moving in with me at a pretty young age. And basically when we were 15, 16, 17, having our own apartment, my mother was gone. My dad was living out of his car. It was a bit of a messy situation. And
sounds like it.
Very grateful we had an apartment to live in, and most of the time there's food, and most of the time there's electricity. Not always, but it was a challenging journey, but it very much made me the man I am today.
Yeah. And how did you get involved or first introduced into men's work, and what pulled you to want to create experiences such as the initiation journey?
Yeah, as I reflect, one of the first men's things I did, so when I first was 25, I was living in LA. I had this massive life change and went and did a master's degree in spiritual psychology. And when I was living there was a place called Agape, which there's a Dr. Michael Beckwith, who's an amazing speaker and teacher. And in Agape, there's a big community, and one of the weekends they were running like a men's weekend. It's part of the community, and I thought, that'd be interesting to do. And I went, and it was beautiful just to be like in this synergy amongst men, and to be in prayer, to be in connection. We were in this beautiful place in California, and I remember that planted a seed inside of like, there's something about that style of doing work. And I was just beginning to do coaching and beginning to do a lot more work. And then fast forward, probably, 5-6 years later, when I kind of reemerged into this field of Tantra and I stepped away for a while. And I had a mentor come into my life. His name is Bruce Lyon. And gathered a group of us in Prague who were all kind of teaching and doing work in this field. There's about 50 men. And that was kind of the initial seeds of this initiation journey. I took that retreat and I basically put a couple more of my own pieces in there, took a few of the rituals. And the thing that drew me into doing that was recognizing that there wasn't a lot of space in men's work for more advanced work.
Right.
More places where guys who had done the Sacred Sons or done the Mankind Project, they're like, okay, where do I go now? Where's the next place where I can meet other edges? And what I felt in that group that Bruce has held was that it was a place that helped us all meet our edge. And he didn't want to keep doing it. And he said, hey, who wants to kind of take this, basic fabrication and then run with it? And I was like, yeah, for sure. I just felt such a change in my own body and such a growing up inside for me that it really sparked more of a place that I'm going to dedicate more of my life to supporting men in this way.
Yeah. And I can absolutely, vouch for the fact that this retreat was very transformative for me and absolutely, changed me. And just wanting to speak into the potency of this work. And this is definitely something I want to kind of weave more into as we go along in our conversation. But something I want to hear a little bit more about is, you specifically focus in the realm of embodiment, and you wrote a book called Embodied Man. I'm curious to hear what got you interested specifically in that realm, and what is your premise around, being embodied as a man? Why is that valuable?
Well, one of the things that I saw when I first got into this field of self-development at 25 is I was working for a big self-development publishing company. There was thousands of authors around the world, people sharing their stories of finding gratitude for some of life's biggest challenges.
What were you doing at that time?
I was living in LA. I was running sunset meditation cruises. I'm off my sailboat. I was studying. I was doing my master's degree. I was really in this bubble of LA.
Right.
And one of the things I witnessed, both for myself as well as others, because I was starting to teach and speak from stage and work with groups, was that often I'd find something where people were saying one thing from stage and saying one thing to a group of people, but then their lives were dictating something else. It was as if their mind understood the concepts, but their body was still dictating a different reality. And so it got me actually quite frustrated initially. I'm like, this is all a joke. Like, nobody's actually embodying these things, including myself. So it led me more on my own spiritual journey and quest. And I kept coaching and doing work in this field, but I stepped away for a while. And when I, 3-4 years later, I don't remember the exact timeline, when I came back in is when I met people and mentors that not only understood esoteric concepts, but were living and breathing an embodiment of that. And I'm like, I can feel these people. I can feel them, not just understand them. In my mind, the only thing my parents pushed upon me at a young age was, you get good grades, do whatever else you want. Doesn't matter if you get good grades. So that's what I did. I had good grades, and I had a lot of other things I did, good and bad. And so intellect was a really high value in my family, not embodiment. There was, when I went to a maritime military school, it wasn't about embodiment. It was about
disconnecting from your embodiment.
Exactly. completely, going through the military was like everything you think we want to break that all down. So you become the man the military needs you to be, which is, happy to talk more on that route. But basically what that inspired was a recognition that, especially for men, so many men spend their lives in their head. They don't even know, like asking a man, how do you feel? And usually his answer is just some concept about the body. It's not actually a feeling that's happening inside of him. So it really just made me realize that there was a necessity for embodied work, especially for the masculine, especially for men.
Yeah, this is really, essential and powerful. And ultimately, there has been different avenues as well for me, because I as well work in this realm of embodiment, that I got into it. Initially, I would say a lot of it was through yoga, but then it was like more moving into somatic practices like somatic experiencing from Peter Levine, but then as well through breath work. Those were kind of like the areas that really distilled within me just the importance to that. And kind of, as you said, that if we don't really work with what's underneath the hood or underneath the surface, our lives will ultimately dictate something else. We may say that we want to do this thing, but then underneath, there's going to be still other things, other motivators that are ultimately going to dictate our lives, So yeah, that's absolutely. So how would you describe a man who's embodied, or an embodied man ultimately?
A great question.
How would you define that?
An embodied man is somebody who meets and lives in this world with an open heart. He has the capacity to be in the mind and to utilize his intellect, but he has the capacity to feel life moving through him. Now, to feel life moving through you, you have to have a balance of both masculine presence, direction, and clarity with feminine receptivity and creativity and intuition. So really, an embodied man is integrated between these polarities inside. What a lot of the unhealthy masculine that I think happens in the world is very alpha-oriented men that don't know how to receive. They love to give and to penetrate and to move forward, but don't know how to be on our heels and receive and surrender. So really, an embodied man connected to the heart, has connected to the mind, has an open heart, feels a lot through the belly, is connected also to his cock, like knows the power of his cock but doesn't misuse it, knows the power that he has to penetrate through anything that's not love, recognizes and is released a lot of the shame around his sexuality, so that these four centers are actually speaking and communicating with one another. That to me is the embodiment of healthy men, healthy masculinity that's actually integrated with femininity.
Yeah, I love that. And what I'm really hearing is that ultimately what it really comes down to is a deeper connection to the various aspects of our body, ultimately some of the essential core ones, our intellect, our mind, our heart, our chest space, our gut, and then as well our balls or our cock, right? And then ultimately balancing those different expressions that, we can weave within, and you spoke to masculine, feminine dynamics. And just to clarify for the listeners, we don't necessarily mean those are, specific to gender, but are ultimately just expressions that we can all, there are phenomenons ultimately that show up in the world that we can all step into, other ways of expressing it as well. Go and flow, yin or yang, alpha, omega. So there's different ways of communicating that, but ultimately finding a way to integrate those and seeing, okay, where have I become underexpressed? Where have I been overexpressed? And finding a way where you can ultimately find a middle ground. And from there, we can ultimately consciously direct our energy the way it's maybe required or the way we want to ultimately. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a dynamic balance that nature shows us every day in our lives. And often what we resist persists inside of us. So someone who isn't integrated inside of these pieces often has aspects of their lives that they're afraid of. So, someone who's listening who might have a fear of, being able to receive love, or a fear of being able to step into his power, or a fear of being able to, be in a healthy relationship. When we begin to know a healthy relationship inside of ourselves, meaning that these two polarities are singing or dancing or are being in connection. And it's not that we don't need anything from the outside world, but the heart of man, the power of man exists when he feels the totality without anything from the outside. That way, when a beautiful woman or a beautiful man, whatever their sexual preference is, shows up in their life, there's a celebratory nature of that, not a needing and grasping. I need to get something from you that I don't know inside of me. So when a man knows himself as whole, then he doesn't grasp for the things that he doesn't already have.
Right.
And what that creates is a really sexy man. It creates a man that's magnetic, that he walks into a room and he's not trying to get anything from anyone, but people are like, wow, there's something about him. What's about him is that he loves himself deeply and completely. And he's not trying to find that new best deal or that next best thing. He's 100% whole and total as he is as a being, and doesn't need to have anything from the outside world. Anything else that happens, he celebrates and appreciates.
Yeah, I love that. And I guess one of the most tangible ways of bringing an example to that I can really feel for, and then as well a lot of men I speak to, is perhaps neediness that can occur within intimate relationship or as well in dating. And I've definitely had numerous experience in my past where that neediness would occur, where I would be very attracted to somebody, or I'm already in a relationship and I'm noticing that there is a bit of a graspiness or clinginess in that relationship. And just speaking into what you said, I was seeking for particular qualities in her that I believed I didn't have inside myself. And because of that, of course, there's a desperation, there's a dependency on that person to receive that, whether it's, sensuality, whether it's sensitivity, compassion, love, patience, understanding, all of these beautiful that we would refer to as more feminine qualities. If I didn't know that in myself, which I didn't, for many years, then naturally we'll want to seek it elsewhere.
Yeah. And this is one of the really, I think, important pieces for men to be able to have a healthy relationship with the external feminine, is for him to know his own internal feminine. Now, but that also challenges men because, like, Shakti is beautiful. Feminine are gorgeous goddesses. Like, I fall in love every day around here, especially in Bali. It's
Absolutely.
like, there's such beauty. And if instead of actually looking at that as something that's outside of me, I can look at that and say, wow, what is that reflecting back to me that I can appreciate, instead of being like, oh my God, it's like looking at a beautiful flower or a beautiful blossoming rose or a beautiful, bouquet that's in a glass window. It's just like appreciating beauty rather than, I need that beauty. Let me feel whole by getting that beauty.
Yeah.
And that's what creates the unhealthy relationship. And usually that place of grabbiness and neediness is coming from the man's young, tender feminine that hasn't grown up and met the world.
What does that mean? Like, just for our listeners who may not understand that.
For sure. So if we're going to look at the world in the framework of polarity, and now I'm saying polarity meaning that everything in this world, like the desk that we're looking at here, the cells in our body, we have positive charges and negative charges. They're cells. Cells are broken down into those charges. That's what makes up matter. That's what makes up the duality that we're in. So if we look at the human body, you and I, we've gone through life more knowing masculinity because that's the way in which the world looks upon us. We're men in the world. We have a cock. We do certain things a certain way, and that's absolutely accurate. I know, like, coming from the military world, like, a man's a man's a man. Like, there's no, like, all this other stuff, although the U.S. military has gotten a little bit weird in the last few years, but that's another whole conversation. So when I'm speaking of the young, tender feminine, I'm saying that if I'm a 40-year-old man, I've developed more of my inner feminine, but when I really started to meet that younger energy, at a young age, I was told not to cry. I was told that I wasn't, I'm supposed to be like a boy. I'm supposed to get things done. I'm supposed to do all these masculine-oriented characteristics. Right. So basically, the outside world has been speaking to only half of me for my entire life because that's the half they see.
Yep.
And so what this younger, tender feminine is inside, it's this younger part of us that hasn't been validated, hasn't said, what do you need, hasn't had a chance to cry, to emote, to laugh, to dance, to play. And so especially men who are listening who are much more alpha-oriented, I had a fear inside of me that if I went into my feminine, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to just become some floating seaweed in the sea that's just... But actually what happened was I became stronger and more on point and more precise in my own masculine energy in a healthy way the more I got to know and allowed my feminine side to grow up more.
Yep.
And this is I think one of the most important pieces for men's work.
Yeah.
And just a little bit more context, one of the reasons I see why men's work is so important when it's embodied men's work, where all parts are welcome, is that the feminine energy that's inside of me or inside of you, if that was a she, if that feminine energy was a she will trust more the masculine that's inside of us than the masculine that's inside of a female body.
Right.
So as much as female bodies are often saying to men, I want to feel you more, I want to feel you more, but if that female body doesn't have a healthy capacity to witness without judgment and be a good space holder, that one moment when that man decides I'm going to feel more and express more, polarity changes.
Yeah.
In that shift of polarity, if that female body doesn't have that capacity and she, in the female body, shames or blames the feminine in the man's body, then that feminine goes down into a darker hole than she's ever been before. Which is why in men's work, when men come together and their feminine can also be welcome, then she grows up and matures.
Yeah.
She starts to integrate more into the body. And then at the end, women can be like, I don't know what my man did this week. I don't know if I want to know, but something's different about him. So thank you. And that's all I need to say. I've heard that so many times. I'm like, perfect. My job is done.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this. And I just want to bring a few things back. First of all, I can totally relate to that. This aspect of me, personally speaking, was shunned, for most of my life, right? So as a result, I didn't build a connection to that. With that, I didn't have any understanding of what I'm feeling and had no understanding of what my needs are. I didn't even know I have needs.
Need? What's a need?
Exactly, right? And that's such a big thing as well for a lot of men. Like, sometimes I may ask them, what do you need? And like, it takes a while for them to really grasp that. Oh, okay, like I can really own that. But to kind of speak into it, when I had more sensitivity towards what I'm feeling and could actually appropriately respond. Let's say, I'm feeling scared. If I were to give myself that security, which is ultimately the need that's there, in moments of fear, there is a deeper confidence or there's a deeper trust on the other side. And so it speaks to that fact that when we embrace and integrate that aspect more deeply, then we won't necessarily turn, as you said, into this floating seaweed, but we will actually like show up more grounded, it's more centered. And that was definitely my own experience. And then the other aspect that I was hearing from you was, I guess as well, the danger of like vulnerability at times, and communicating ultimately in moments when the other person cannot receive that. And I think that is such an important aspect because there is this narrative in our culture, where like vulnerability is being praised and it's beautiful and it's needed and we need it in order ultimately to have intimacy and connection and relationship. We don't necessarily often consider the drawback of that and the danger of that can occur specifically in intimate relationship, where if that person can't meet us or if that man is like still very fragile in that, he may show up like totally needy or like clumsy, and that may be very off-putting for somebody, right? So to have that, to have that man come in a men's container and reveal those aspects and actually, I'm going to say, cultivate a level of maturity there, and then he can show up as well with this woman with a level of deeper certainty.
Yeah, which is ultimately, I feel like what so many men are longing for is to feel more strength, power, and certainty and confidence as a man. And it's a funny thing because when I tell men about, or they read my book, I tell men about this, they're like, but I don't want to deal with my feminine. Like, I want to be more of a man. And I say, yeah, I understand that. Like, absolutely. And in doing that, when fear does arrive, this power and the strength of that man is able to then hold the power of the vulnerability that you're there, and they can actually begin to communicate together. If that's not there, then it's just going to be a continual longing for someone to be there on the outside that's never going to be there.
Totally.
And that's, and that creates such a loop in our society. It's why so many men, they turn 50 years old and they have these midlife crises because they feel like there's never been anyone there to hold them. And another topic on this, it's like looking at, during COVID when male suicide rates, even now, male suicide rates have gone super high. Because so many men feel like they have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
They have nowhere to turn because that inner vulnerability inside feels so deep and dark. It's like, who on earth could I ever speak to about this?
Yeah.
And that's where men's circles comes in, because men can relate to the depth of that vulnerability. They can relate to the depth of that pain in a way that it's not that female bodies can't, they just can't necessarily relate because they're in a different polarity.
Yeah, totally. And what I would describe as well is sometimes there can be a particular intensity as well of being a man, and the intensity of our experience at times. And I think as well, the uniqueness of what we ultimately experience, having another man in front of us, there is a deeper ability to relate to that man's experience, allowing that other man who's maybe, confessing or, opening up to feel seen, right? So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't be who I am without men's work. I wouldn't be who I am without being in spaces where I could ultimately reveal myself. And it was so interesting because, the first time I got into men's circles, I think on my first men's circle, I recall mentioning to those men, I'm afraid of all of you. and I'm afraid that you'll judge me, right? Because I was ultimately projecting my experience with my father, but then as well being bullied in school onto those men. So those containers allowed an opportunity for me to address those stories that I picked up through that time, but then as well rewrite those stories and recognize, okay, that may have been in the past, but that doesn't need to be my experience now. And there's different types of men as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really celebrate about all the different shapes and forms. Like, I say this to men all the time. They're like, oh, there's no men's circles in my community, it's not around. I'm like, start yourself. Like, just if there's 3 guys or 2 guys and you're just there and you're creating a conscious container that lets you just be vulnerable and share what's on your mind without smoking and joking and, but just a held container that lets you just unravel some of the stories that are inside, like that alone can just feel like, they heard me. Just to feel heard can be so important, and it's such a thing that so many men feel like that there's nobody that can understand me.
Yeah, and an opposing force as well to that would be the value of accountability and challenge. I think that is ultimately one of the masculine gifts, that we're being called to integrity, when perhaps we communicate something that we aspire to or something that we're challenged with. I think there will come a moment within any man where it's like, enough talking, like, do something about this, right?
Let's get this done.
Yeah, lift them up, rise them up in that way. And if we don't have those conscious containers where we can actually reveal those aspects or be challenged, we won't be held accountable. We're not going to hold ourselves accountable, right? So.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to bring up around challenge is, this fine line between healthy challenge and competition with men, and where that's like a beautiful piece, and where it can also be, the shadow side and the bullying and that other thing. And it's like, in men's work, men are like, oh, but it's just, there's no challenge, there's no where you're challenging each other. It's like, yeah, that's a big piece of it. And the challenge actually is to me this dynamic between power with rather than power over. And so many of the masculine leadership that I see on this planet is often a male body holding a place of, I'm in power and I'm going to have power over you as a dictator, as a leader. And I'm going to direct you because I know best. And this to me is kind of an old paradigm that's dying as we speak, and politically, economically, socially, many different ways and forms. And this, you could say, Aquarian community-oriented space where, a guy like yourself, like me, like brothers in our community who are all rising in power. And we're rising in power not to the state of saying, I need to be better than you. To me, it's like, hey, I know the things you're doing and the people you're reaching is going to be different than the people I'm reaching. And together we rise. Together, actually, we step on each other's shoulders to help each other and to be the reflections to say, hey, bro, I've got you. Like, we've got this together, not like, oh, let me push you down so I get the pat on the back that I never got from my dad.
Yeah.
And that's often I see where a lot of these unhealthy places are coming. Men trying to get their ego validated by doing the thing, making all the money, supporting all the things, but then inside they still feel empty because they're still trying to get the pat on the back from dad they never got.
Huge. And it was definitely my experience for sure. I mean, for my first 10 years into, working and entrepreneurship as well, I was definitely chasing the validation of my dad, often very unconsciously, right? And just, grinding, looking for status, accumulating, just being very linear, never recognizing, the desire came from wanting to prove my dad wrong, right? And wanting as well some form of acknowledgement from him as well, which he's actually already given me. Yeah. But I've never received it. I have never actually taken the time to be like, to be truly receive it. And of course, I've been, unpacking that for a few years. But there was one distinct experience that I had a few months ago, actually, where I was in the US and I was at a men's retreat from a mentor. And man, I remember I was at a riverbank and we were supposed to, whatever we were working on throughout that week, we were supposed to be sitting with that thing, and we were supposed to let it go. And then that was kind of like our initiative to go into the river, which was freezing, and to kind of like just let that go, right? And the thing that I was working with was my relationship to my dad. And man, something just kind of opened up the floodgates inside of me and made me realize there has been this invisible wall between me and my dad where I have never allowed myself to love him, and I have never allowed him to love me. And so as a result, I've never been in this position where I could like truly have a relationship, not just with him, but just with anybody, because my focus has been to just get ahead and to prove myself and my worth. And it broke my heart, it broke my heart that so much of my life has been dictated around that, where I could just love him, and I could just have a loving relationship with him. I wanted to speak into that because it's such an important dynamic, how that can happen between father and son. And that was definitely the case for me.
Yeah, I mean, with my own father, I don't know that I was ever seeking his validation. I think I was always just kind of wishing and longing for his support. Like, his support was there from the heart. And that was one thing that it was all like his loving support. To this day, it's like I can feel the depth and the love of his heart, and that's always there. It was more like the logistical personality life of like, okay, yeah, I can buy you dinner. You're like, yeah, I mean, I don't know many times that's ever happened, and that's fine. And I've come to be with that and sit with all the different pieces that are alive with that. And, what I've learned as a result, and, at this point in my life, I can, sit, and usually when I'm with my dad, we have a glass of scotch and talk about sports or something like that, something I usually try to pretend like I have some understanding of. But, there's beautiful conversations. And I think the biggest thing that's helped me move through all of it is just loving acceptance, and that's with all of my family. It's a place of just loving someone for who they are rather than loving them for who I wanted them to be. And that was a huge life lesson in many different ways and forms, like trying to fall in love with a partner's potential, trying to fall in love with the potential of a parent. Like, why are you doing, all the other parents aren't doing this. Why can't you function in this way? It's like, oh, this is the curriculum for my soul this lifetime. Okay, all right. There's a lot of learning here. And then it's like, okay, I can just lovingly accept and to be able to look into his eyes and to, even my brother who, I love dearly and have a, beautiful, brotherly love with, but just accepting him for who he is, not who I think he could be. And I think that to me is actual love. And that to me is the same thing beyond competition. It's like loving the brother because he's doing his best. He's showing up in the world, and when he's not, it's like giving him a little kick and saying, hey, rise up a little. I just had a pretty amazing situation with my brother. I was back in the US. I was teaching in Austin, and I was speaking on a Sunday, and I happened to be staying with him for the weekend, so I was teaching at a festival there. And on that Sunday morning, before I was teaching in the afternoon, I was doing a live broadcast for this online summit with men all over the world. And it was about a hour and a half interview, and he the entire time was like on that couch right there. And I felt like I was speaking to him the entire time. He was just listening. He's like, I would never listen to one of your interviews, but thank you. Like, and at times he's just crying, he's just crying in front of me. At the end, he looks at me, he's like, wow, you're really good. Like, amazing. Like, I really feel you, and thank you. Like, this is what you've just shared. As he's going through massive changes in his relationship and his life. And it was really beautiful to like have that transmission in that moment with him. I could really feel a depth of deeper brotherhood between us.
What was that like for you to experience that from your brother in this way?
I mean, I could feel when I was sitting there speaking to an audience of a couple hundred people, and my brother's there in front of me just crying, and I'm speaking to the audience. I'm seeing him behind the computer, and it was, I could just feel this place inside of like, oh, this is why I do this work. Like, these are the men's lives I know I get to impact when they can hear a message of their own self-love, their own self-acceptance, as well as, for him, he's finding this journey of just, finding healthy boundaries. And, it's part of what I was speaking into, and I could feel like how much what I was sharing was really impacting him that way. And it was just the gratification inside of me to know that I get to have an impact on, he's 8 years older than me. We've always, we're not super close, but we're close through the years. And just to know, like, I get to, have an impact into his life, like he's impacted me in many ways, and, very grateful. So it was a really touching moment.
That's so beautiful, man. I would love to backtrack just a little bit.
Yeah.
And I just would like to speak a little bit more into some of the things you addressed around competition and power with versus power over. And what it does remind me of is one of the first days within our retreat where we spoke more around the warrior archetype. And I would love for you to speak a little bit, or at least engage in a conversation around it, because I would suggest that is definitely one of those energies that is rather suppressed among a lot of men. So I'm curious to hear, why do you believe first of all, why did you put it in the retreat, and why do you believe it's important to just address that as men?
Yeah, I love you bring this in. The warrior, there's not too many generations back that either a grandfather or great-grandfather, one of us has been on a battlefield with either a gun, a rifle, a sword. Like, there's a warrior inside of us. And so part of having a man know that warrior inside of him is so that he can come back into more integration. But it's also so that he doesn't express the unhealthy warrior in the shadow, and so that he starts to know the power of his own sword, the power of his capacity to meet another eye to eye, soul to soul, and to know inside of him that he has a capacity to kill. Now, when we know the capacity to kill, as a young man going through the military, when I learned that energy inside of me, something shifted. I felt stronger, more clear, more confident to know I could be anywhere in the world and protect myself to a certain degree. I'm not a huge man, but I'm strong enough,
Sure.
So the warrior in our society often is looked at as the unhealthy warrior that takes, that consumes, that penetrates without consent, that, does a lot in the world that creates a lot of destruction. So a lot of men, especially in the last, you could say 30, 40 years, especially, have really grown up into this place of being afraid of embodying that warrior because of, the insurance companies, because of different aspects of, rising social culture, because of all these different things. So it leaves a man almost what I would call walking on eggshells. This sense of like, oh, but society wants me to be strong, but then I need to be really vulnerable and gentle, but I need to be strong.
Yep.
And so there's this dance that happens. So for a man to actually step into his healthy warrior and to start to know the strength of his own muscles, the strength of his own body, that actually creates more safety rather than being afraid of that. Because if he's afraid of it, when he has too many, drinks on a Friday night, probably that unhealthy warrior is going to come out that's just going to cause a lot of violence and destruction.
Sure. Yeah.
When I was at the military academy and I had a lot of pain and anger and frustration towards my mother for a lot of things from childhood, I would get blackout drunk in New York City, and my friends were like, yeah, you were trying to fight every guy in the place. We had to hold you down and take you out, because I had so much anger inside of me and I wasn't knowing how to express it in a healthy way. And so that's really what helps a man be more integrated, is knowing the depth and the power of that warrior, which ultimately creates more safety for himself as well as all those around him. But again, it's a warrior power that's not, I'm a warrior, I'm going to kill you and destroy you just so I can validate who I am. It's just that there's a gentleness. There's a gentleness to the warrior, but the firmness to know I've got this and don't fuck with me.
Yeah, I love that. There's so much in what you just said. But what I'll say as well is, I think this dichotomy between, do you know James Mattingly by any chance? Yeah. So I had him recently as well on the podcast, and we spoke about this challenge around don't be too manly, but then as well don't be too soft. That was kind of like the big thing that we you spoke about, and as well, yeah, it's this phenomenon of walking on eggshells, right? People want me to be in my power, but not too much, right? And so in many ways, what I feel is there's a lot of shame among a lot of men around their power, but then as well around their anger, which as a result doesn't necessarily allow them to befriend those aspects inside of themselves. And if they don't know those aspects inside themselves, they won't necessarily feel a level of confidence, right? And the big thing that I'm seeing is, yeah, definitely like feel that part of you that is dangerous, that can be dangerous, but don't be a danger, right? And I think there is a way of, when we know that energy inside of us and we know how to wield that energy inside of us, we are actually much safer, you know? And I think that is something that you definitely speak into here.
Yeah, we actually build and create more of a safe container for ourselves when we know the power of our penetrative presence. And I'll break down what makes sense for me, especially around polarity, and then to also look at light and dark. So we could look at more of like a light warrior or like a light masculine, which is more of like the Jesus archetype. That's the one that's saying, give me all your issues. I'm going to receive them. I'm going to transmute them. It's a compassionate, loving, heart-centered warrior that's there. That's like, I'm going to hold all of it. And that's such a beautiful archetype. It's such a beautiful thing for man to embody. Yep. You know, the shadow side of that, you know, you spend enough time in Ubud and you can meet enough shadow sides of that. But one that's like, oh, I am the savior. I am Jesus. I'm here. And it's just like always trying to validate, because that's the only archetype they know. The other side of it is more the darker side. It's more, you could say, the dark masculine, or the, you know, that darker, more dense energy. Yep. And that energy in many ways is what society is most afraid of. It's what a lot of people are most afraid of, because that's that dark, dense, penetrative energy. They're afraid of it because most men only know how to vibrate that energy in an unhealthy way. So really, an embodied man knows the power of his light masculine. That's the space holder. That's the give me all the things I'm going to listen and hear. But he also knows the power of the dark. And that power of the dark is that power that looks eye to eye with another man or another being. And the power of his presence penetrates through anything that's not love. Now, this isn't like a mushy-gushy love. This is all of the bullshit, all of the conditionings, all of the stuff that human has been holding on to, that's actually looking to meet that dark masculine inside of himself. So when, as another brother, can hold that energetic, and to actually look him in the eyes and say, hey, I see you. Enough is enough. Like, you've got this. And however that needs to happen, sometimes there can be an entanglement. Sometimes there can be a calling out, whatever it may be. But the dark masculine is not trying to get his ego validated. He doesn't give a fuck. He has no care about the trying to be validated. He does it because there's nothing else that vibrates alive inside of him. And what the dark masculine also has is a direct connection to death. He knows death. So a man that's afraid of dying isn't actually living. A man that's not in his full integrity and empowerment and living on purpose in the direction of who he is as a soul incarnate is not actually fully embodied. A man that has met death, meets death, and death is a friend of his, then he can actually show up in the world knowing the power of his sword, but the power of his sword that penetrates through all the other bullshit he's seeing out there. And therefore, he steps up and he's calm and centered and not trying to prove his power to others.
Beautifully put. And this is definitely something I want to get into, you know, specifically that healthy dark masculine aspect. And, you know, this is something you definitely work a lot around within your retreats. And it was definitely a game changer for me to start exploring that as well. And, you know, through some of those embodiment practices that we did, to start feeling into, okay, what is that like? You know, what is that like to have that dark penetrative energy that is not necessarily shadow or unhealthy, but is more really coming from this position of, I'm going to cut through all the bullshit. I'm going to cut through anything that's not truth, and actually, just stand, what you said, stand for love, right? And that could be ultimately, calling a brother out, when he is playing small, or when he's getting lost in his excuses or whatever, and standing strong in that. While simultaneously, it could be as well this, you maybe have a vision or a certain mission that you feel called. You don't necessarily procrastinate anymore, but no, you take that vision and run, right? And you claim it for yourself. You penetrate that vision into the world, right? And another aspect, of course, where that can come up is in the bedroom, right? Where consciously done with a connection to the heart, there can be this capacity to claim our women, let's say, or ravish our women. And that can be a very fulfilling, I guess, energy. What are your thoughts on that? Because we haven't gone so much into that, and would love to segue more into relationships now.
Stark masculine sexual power. Let's dive in. It's what the feminine, and I'm not saying female bodies, but the feminine in many ways is longing for.
Why is she longing for that? Tell me more.
Well, because when the dark masculine is in the healthy way, and it's vibrating inside and isn't seeking validation, what it does is it creates this containment field. This containment field which says to the feminine, whatever happens, whatever is going on, whatever you're going through, I've got you. Whatever is there, whatever is happening, whatever you're going through, I've got you. And so this containment of the dark masculine, the feminine can say, I can actually let go here. I don't need to figure things out. And what that dark masculine does is it creates a space, and nature does this, the universe does this, matter does this. It creates a space for the feminine to surrender into her divine feminine leadership, into her divine feminine creativity. So, and this is something that's beyond like words I'm trying to put to it. There's an energetic, and I'm sure any woman or man who's listening to this, when the feminine feels that energy that's just like lets them melt, what it is creating and what they're feeling is safety. They're feeling safety that all of a sudden, some shadow sexual part isn't going to come around and start to like try to take advantage of them or try to get something. So to be in the healthy dark means that there's not a needy little bitch inside. To be in the healthy dark, and this is where a lot of the unhealthy sexual shadows exist in this field of sacred sexuality, is that you have male bodies knowing how to vibrate in dark masculine energy. They're learning how to do that. They've experienced it. And then they meet the external feminine that way. Now, in that moment, they're like, wow, they're surrendering. Now, in that moment, they're feeling the feminine surrender. If that being who's holding the dark starts to get his unmet sexual needs met from the surrendered feminine, red flag, red flag, like game over. Game over, we're in for issues, trauma's about to happen, shit's about to go down. So the way that dark masculine holds a capacity for healthy ravishment, healthy containment, is that actually the one who's guiding and leading that show is the one surrendering. And this is really opening up into more like, BDSM conversation, things like that. But the Dom isn't actually the Dom. The Dom is the one who's listening to the cues of the one who's surrendering,
right? Of
the submissive.
Yeah.
So this ravishment happens by deep listening. Now, what is deep listening required? Yeah. Deep listening means that person who is being the Dom has the capacity to receive feminine information.
Yeah.
So there's a conscious place of penetrating, destroying, like annihilating anything else, but you're receiving all of this information, which then informs the masculine about how to ravish more deeply, about how to listen to the signs of the body that are happening as ravishment happens. And any woman who's listening or has felt this before, you know when that's present, because all it lets you do is surrender more and more and more.
Right. Yeah. Potent. Very deep.
There's a lot there.
Yeah. You went super deep. I love it. No, I love it. I love it. And just kind of maybe highlighting as well that the dark masculine is not operating from a place of expense of another person, but really we're coming from this place of like we're with each other, right? Yeah. I would love to segue a little bit into more relationships. And the thing that I want to ask you is, where are we going wrong in relationships? Where are the struggles right now? What are you seeing?
Well, one of the biggest issues I see in relationships, and I know this is the Heart of Man podcast, is men not knowing their own inner union. Is just as we were saying before, like they're consistently outsourcing all of their own feminine onto the outer feminine. I'll give you an example. Like years ago, it's in a beautiful relationship. It was a woman who really initiated me very much into this tantric path. We were together for a couple of years, and there was a moment of we were separating. Things were ending, and we were in Egypt at the time, a very tumultuous trip, lots of challenges along the way. And we were in Luxor, and she left to go visit a friend. And, I stayed behind. And what happened to me in this moment is I realized like there was such a neediness inside of me. There was such a neediness of like, oh my God, you're leaving. Because I felt in that moment she was leaving, like the relationship was over. And I just cried. I cried, and I cried some more. About halfway through the tears, I remember I felt this energy, this presence of something come over me, and it basically said, like, what about me? Like, what I will put the context to of my own feminine, saying, what about me? And so what that did is I finally took the projection off of the external feminine onto here. And so for the next couple of years, what I did is cultivate more inner union. I cultivated more of my primary relationship was my relationship to self. Now, not in a narcissistic way. I was still dating and connecting with others, but what was my primary partnership was this relationship happening within me. Right. And as a result of that, I think it was 2.5, 3 years later is when Raven and I met. And both of us having a high value of inner union, and then a beautiful relationship, for several years together. So one of the things I see wrong is we make our partner everything. We make our partner our sun, our moon, our Pluto, our Mercury, our Venus, our everything. Our partner is everything. You gotta be my best friend. You gotta be this. You gotta be that. You gotta be this. And it's just like, it's exhausting for both.
Absolutely. Two-person village.
Yeah. And so really what helps healthy relationships, especially for men, is like, have some dudes in your life that you can share with. Have some dudes that you can call upon when things are going rough. Like, there's a few men who, in my life that, are I'd say 3 of the best friends in my life that have never been in a men's circle. Probably will never go in a men's circle. One, I'm going to be at his wedding in Aruba in about a month. But what I know about all 3 of those men is like, at any time in my life, if something were to go wrong or something would be up, I could call them and they would be on the phone with me for hours. They would probably fly across the world to come support me. And those are men who I've seen through so many different things. I mean, I have a lot of other good men in my life as well. And so I know in relationship that I have a lot of healthy brothers around me, and that's taken time to cultivate. So that alone helps for a healthy relating, so you're not expecting your partner to be your everything.
Yeah. A lot in here. I want to slow it down a little bit. And first of all, I would love to hear, what would that look like to cultivate, as you said, that inner marriage, and cultivate more of those softer qualities in a man if he doesn't know those and is projecting those out on a woman?
Yeah, I mean, another great question. So looking at where can you be more receptive? Where can you not just penetrate life, but take in life? Maybe that's, going for a walk in nature on your own, just to smell the flowers. Maybe that's making yourself a bath at the end of the day after a hard day. Maybe that's spending an extra 3 or 4 minutes under the shower just to not always go, but actually slowing down to listen more, to feel more. Maybe that's exploring non-agenda based self-pleasure, where you just put your hands on your body and you just give some loving touch to your body that's not genital focused. Maybe, that's enjoying, something that might feel feminine to you, something that might feel edgy to you. Maybe, you go and get a massage or whatever it may be, something where you're outside of the doing and more in the being, and probably, especially men, if you're not in Ubud, Bali, just come to Ubud and you'll get lots of being.
For sure. Too much.
Yeah, probably a little bit too much. I think for sure.
Yeah, that's great. I love what you said. One of the teachers that I was very inspired by, his name is John Wineland, and he speaks a lot about, for men, cultivating time of no demand, having time where there is no demands being placed on you, and you can ultimately do nothing, and do nothing means also not thinking about something or planning something, strategizing something, analyzing something, but simply be.
Yep.
And this could be in your favorite spot or whatever, but just be, right? And it's still one of my edgiest practices, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And also to clarify, that's not sitting in meditation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because many men, I'm gonna do nothing. I'm gonna go meditate.
Yeah,
and you're doing
again.
You're doing.
Yes. Yeah. So good. So good. Another thing that you said, a trap I'm hearing is that we make ultimately, we outsource all our, relationship needs onto our partner, or our human needs ultimately onto our partners, whilst that container cannot necessarily hold everything. So we are required to have, areas outside of that, whether it's our brothers or, women being with their friends. We need those so there is not so much strain on the relationship to have those needs be met.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I see this a lot with clients and probably because it's a pattern I've seen in my own life. And I'll speak back into the unhealthy light masculine. And I see a lot of men who come into the spiritual world and they realize, I need to be a space holder. And what they end up becoming is, instead of a space holder, is the punching bag for the unhealthy feminine. That's like, you did this wrong. You did, fuck, okay, I did this. And they're just like beating themselves down into the sorrow of their own disrespect. And they're not actually holding healthy boundaries. So what, in relationship, you are not required by any means, shape, or form to be the punching bag for the unhealthy feminine, often in female bodies. And female bodies listening, what that means is take your emotions to a pillow, not to your man. Like, don't make him the reason for your upset. He may have done something that pissed you off, and fair enough. But let that be a tool to remind you of the things that you haven't learned to love and appreciate about yourself, rather than making him the reason for your upset. That's not to take the responsibility off of him or off of the man, but it's to actually take the emotional responsibility back to ourselves. Yeah. I had a huge learning lessons with this when I was, a relationship many, many years back now. I remember going into couple sessions literally with a black eye. I remember going into a couple session like after a very fresh fight, and I had this mentality of like super light masculine. I'm gonna be the savior. I fell in love absolutely with the potential of what we could be, and that's what I was in love with, not the reality of what is. I had friends around me that were like, yeah, whatever pain and suffering you're going through, I'm not sure why, but keep doing it, dude. Not like, out of spite, but they're like, okay, some lesson here. And I remember when I got out of that relationship, I was like, whoa, that was painful, because I was in love with something, the potential of what our beings could be, rather than the reality of what was and what is.
Yeah.
And I see that as a really big issue as well. And a lot of men, especially, like taking breadcrumbs and not actually owning the value of what they bring into the relationship. There are a lot of people, and this is men and women, female bodies, male bodies, are staying in relationship because they're afraid of losing love. They're afraid of, oh, I can't leave because then where will I find love again? And so when we begin to know love inside of ourselves and we're not seeking it, we're knowing it within, and we can actually celebrate it within. A relationship becomes something to celebrate rather than something to get from.
Yeah.
And this, is many different shapes and forms of that I see happening throughout the world,
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I love just, I guess, this paradigm shift way of thinking of not having a partner because we're seeking to get particular needs met, but we're ultimately coming together because we're enhancing maybe our quality of life, we're enjoying, our time together, but it's not from this place of, you have something I don't have, and, I need you to complete me. And then, we kind of stay in these unhealthy relationships as a result of that. What was as well really interesting, when you said boundaries, what was really interesting for me was, I had this thought of like, you can't have boundaries if you can't feel, right? And if you don't have an understanding of what your needs are, right? So kind of speaking as well to how we started this out, the importance of embodiment. If you don't feel, if you don't know your needs, you kind of communicate boundaries, and then you will become punching bag.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I see a lot of people trying to communicate boundaries, trying to solve arguments, trying to do things when there's a very upset little boy or little girl inside. So take this for what it is, but the moment that there's upset stirring inside of you, don't try to go to logic and reason. Don't try to figure things out together, because it's never going to work. Totally. It requires people to have healthy, mature emotionality to pull themselves away, to be able to then come into a healthy, communication together where they've done their own inner work, and then they're saying, this is actually what I need. But trying to have boundaries or expressing, what you need from a place of upset, the other person feels it. It's like looking and saying, I'm not upset. Everything's good here. Yeah, everything's fine. Can't you tell? I'm all good. And there's just a waiting fucking fire inside.
Yeah, it's a really good point. When the nervous systems get activated to not even talk. And I think that is as well a humbling lesson ultimately that I'm I feel like learning now slowly, but to not talk about things when our nervous systems are activated, but actually finding a way to regulate ourselves, right? To really calm ourselves down, because any place that we're kind of come from when we're triggered is usually from the past, usually some experience where mommy or daddy didn't meet our needs, or we didn't feel safe, or maybe we have past relationship experiences that we're then starting to project onto our partners, which, valid enough, but it's not fair onto our partners, right?
Yeah, and relationship is the ultimate spiritual practice.
Why would you say that?
Well, because there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. If you try to run or hide, you're just going to recreate a similar relationship, but it's going to be the same person with a different name over and over and over again. I'm sure people listening have done that. You've created the same partner over and over and over again. They're just slightly different traits. Maybe they have a different name. Sometimes they might even have the same name. I've seen that. I had a situation years ago living in Singapore, and I was out on a date for the second time with this woman, and I asked her what her birthday was. And she told me, her birthday was right around my mother's birthday, circulating around the last, however many women that I'd been with around that same time. And I just said to her, I'm like, okay, I'm going to end this now, because I realize the pattern that I'm playing out here. And since then, I've never attracted the woman with the same birthday around that time. So I say that relationship is a spiritual practice, because the person that's coming into your life, that you're opening the doorways and the cords of your love and care and aliveness, that's also going to reflect all the things inside of you that you haven't learned to love, honor, and appreciate, which can be really painful, and which is why divorce rates have skyrocketed, because people aren't willing to do the inner work. They want to just pretend like, oh, that's them, that's their issue. But when we're pointing the finger, there's three fingers pointing back at us. So it's a good opportunity in relationship to actually self-reflect and to grow through it.
Yeah, I love that, man. Let's go a little bit deeper into sex. You know, we start talking about it, but I would like to hear a little bit more about it. And I would like to hear, how can we start exploring maybe more tantric ways of making love? But then as well, how can men become, let's say, more multi-orgasmic? Because I think that is as well something a lot more men are very interested in, how to maybe last longer, how to experience more pleasure. So
yes. Yeah, it's the question that often gets in my email inbox the most. The place of being more multi-orgasmic, you call it, or, anywhere of that is where we let go of agenda in the bedroom. It's where men, you begin to stop ejaculating. I'll say that maybe 3 more times. Stop ejaculating every time you have sex. Don't ejaculate every time you have sex. Ejaculation every time you have sex, it doesn't work. I have to say it 3 different times. Maybe they'll receive it. Maybe some point, some aspect will hit inside. I say it to myself as well at times, So tantric lovemaking is where we meet ourselves ultimately, and we begin to meet another from the place of the mystery. It's a place of 2 people coming together and knowing that we don't know what's going to happen. We're not going into the motions. I touch you here, you touch me here. I know you get, hard like this, and you get a, clit orgasm like this. And, we're meeting, we're exploring, we're discovering. Doesn't mean we don't know what our other partner likes, but we're beginning to listen deeply. And it's not just a, 2-second ejaculatory sneeze or a, 2-second clitoral, aliveness. It's like really the body beginning to unwind and meet one another in beautiful, alive ways. And one of the reasons, especially for men, to have a healthy emotional body is that if you can't feel, if you don't know how to feel your body, if you don't know how to feel senses, you're not going to be multi-orgasmic. You might try to, watch every YouTube video you can about how to do it, but if you can't feel, as much tools and practices as you learn, you're just manipulating your body. To be multi-orgasmic means that you can start to feel life beginning to circulate through. That way, that means that when your erotic energy is more alive, when your sexual energy is on a 7 or an 8, you don't need to go to the 9 or 10 and then ejaculate. Yeah. You're able to regulate back down, and you're able to circulate that energy, literally the seed, your semen, from your base through your whole body. It gets transmuted. It gets transformed through the whole body in beautiful ways that becomes this multi-orgasmic aliveness. Yeah. This is the gateways to really being a multi-orgasmic man.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, to bring it back, what I'm hearing is that a lot of people get very habituated in their ways of making love.
Yep.
And it becomes very goal-oriented, where it's more about focusing on the orgasm, and that's kind of like the sole purpose, Whereas with tantric lovemaking, it's actually about letting that go completely and actually exploring things more from a present base, moment to moment exploration, and actually allowing exploration to be kind of the guiding principle.
For sure. Yeah, it's not having an agenda exploring doesn't mean there can't be wild animalistic sex. Sure. Or, like a lot of people say, oh, it's tantric love, so it's really slow. It's like sometimes, yeah. And then sometimes it's wild animalistic craziness, and sometimes it's super soft and sensual and we're not moving. Yeah. But there's not a need for it to be any way, shape, or form. It's just a unwinding and unraveling moment to moment. Like, my current beloved here in Bali, sometimes our lovemaking is just in pure stillness. Other times the sheets are so sweaty because there's just been this wild meeting of animals that have come together, and it's like both are absolutely tantric. They're both absolutely alive, and they're just meeting different aspects of our being.
Yeah, Tantra doesn't judge anything.
Yeah.
Which is one of the huge things that I learned. Yeah, it's interesting. When I became a breathwork facilitator and when I really focused on breathwork, interesting enough, it actually transformed my sex life, even though I didn't intend to have that be the case. But interesting enough, I could last longer. And it's always a little bit like not as tangible when you speak about energy, but like I was more sensitive and I could feel the arousal was rising, and I was learning through my breath to actually start moving, breathing, circulating that energy around me. Why is it important for a man to not ejaculate? Because you said, but a lot of men may not know why, because it feels good.
Feels good, I want to do it. Well, I'd say that it can feel just as good, if not better, with being able to have not just one of those in lovemaking, but imagine 10 of those. 10 or 20, or just a living, breathing orgasm that's happening in your body. Ejaculate, the semen that comes out of you, is there to create life. So that's a lot of life force energy. You and I are here because our dads and our moms came together, sperm and egg met to create life. So every time a man is releasing that seed, then his seed is leaving his body. If he can transmute that seed, which is a tantric principle of basically energy just changing matter and form, the same way an ice cube melts into water, which eventually evaporates into air. It's all there, just in different form. So this seed, this semen that's within us, when we can learn how to transmute it, then we can begin to circulate it through our body, which brings us more alive. And so if we're ejaculating every day, we begin to, age more. We begin to really, change our relationship with our body, because this life force is continually leaving us, is continually emptying out.
Yeah, I think I just want to, just share, a personal example around this, around being a bit more conscious around that. I think what was really awakening for me a few years ago, I read Mantak Chia's book, The Multi-Orgasmic Man, which is kind of like a classic within that realm. But yeah, more from a Taoist principle, it speaks a lot about longevity and health and maintaining health and vitality. And I just explored what it would be like not to ejaculate as often, as I would, right? And then I kind of went 30 days, didn't do anything, right? Didn't masturbate, didn't ejaculate. And then since then, I've become much more sensitive and attuned to that, and I'm much more mindful actually of not ejaculating as frequently. And when I do, I feel it. I truly feel it, and I feel lethargic or softer or slower the next day. And for somebody who is really wanting to create or has a huge vision in the world, I think that is just valuable to know, that this energy can actually be used for, your gifts and your mission and your purpose.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, that energy creates a human. That energy can create a lot of, amazing projects and principles and pieces. A few years back, there's a documentary that's coming out, I think in this next year or so, from, his name just left my brain. But it's a book from the 50s.
You mean Think and Grow Rich?
Yes. Thank you for my brain went blank. Yeah, and he talks about in that book the power of the sex transmutation. And so a friend of mine, put together this documentary, and it's actually a whole movie production that's going to be out. And there's an entire movie coming out about the power of sex transmutation from Napoleon Hill. And it's amazing. This was a book from the 1950s, and he just talks about in this book the power and the importance of a man, especially being able to cultivate and to utilize his sexual power to transmute that sexual transmutation into whatever we want to create. Any amazing, powerful creators you'll meet in the world, they're having a healthy relationship in one way, shape, or form to their seed.
I love it, man. Yeah, this is so great. A few parting questions, because I feel like this conversation already just flew by. And it's been awesome. I've enjoyed this so much.
Yeah.
But one thing I felt really called to ask you is you travel so much, and you're all around the world, and I wonder, how do you tend with aloneness? Because one of the challenges I often see with men is isolation and loneliness. And so I'm curious to hear, how do you navigate that yourself? And what would you say to any man who may feel lonely or is perhaps intentionally or consciously or unconsciously isolating himself?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's something for me that I really got to meet spending time on ships. When I was in my early 20s and I was working as a merchant mariner, and I'd be out at sea for months, and you're on a ship with 15, 20 guys, but you're spending a lot of time alone on the bridge, alone in your room, even though there's others around you. And what I started to do was journal into my aloneness. I started to journal into, and in one of the first experiences out at sea, I actually met my soul. And I just started to have a dialogue with my own higher self, with my own authentic self. And I'm not saying every man needs to do that, but what I'd say is utilize aloneness as a gateway to get to know yourself more deeply. Notice the part of you that reaches for the alcohol or the food or the thing that's going to numb you from not actually feeling. And one of the best things you can do is if like there's a lot happening and you're frustrated, just start to write, either handwritten or on your computer, whatever comes out. Like, just let yourself be a empty channel for whatever's arriving. For me, in my travels, I mean, I do travel a lot. I'm with people a lot. I find actually when I have like a night on my own, or a night, without a beloved or lover, and I'm just, wherever I am in the world, I savor that more than anything. It's like, oh, this is me time, because I'm often in front of groups or speaking on stage or doing these other things. So like when I have those moments, I really savor that. I really take it in. And I savor it even more because in those moments earlier in life, when I had a lot of days like that, I got to know myself really deeply. I got to know the part of me that when I do reach for connection, am I reaching for connection from a place of wholeness, or am I reaching for connection? I'm like, oh, I need something that I don't know inside. And that's really where you can start to change that inner dynamic.
I love how you put that. Yeah, it's really beautiful. And yeah, it kind of brings it as well at a very like opportunistic or like lens where there's possibility for deeper connection, deeper relationship with oneself.
Yeah.
So I really like that. Another thing that I really was curious to hear before we close off, which was, you hold a lot of trainings and a lot of retreats, and you're just like on mission and on purpose. And I'm curious to hear, what would you say to a man who feels inspired to create something and wants to serve? And yeah, like what would you say to that man, if he wants to get on that journey, but he doesn't really know what to do? And
I'd say there was a time when I was younger where my desire to serve was so that I could be seen by others. And so one of the things I'd say is find out your why. Like the why that I found for me is a deep knowing inside that when I, am on my deathbed, I want to be able to look back in life and say, I did my best. I gave it my all. I lived deeply. I loved completely. I lived in joy. I made love a lot. I sang in the rain. I danced. I played. I'm building a home right now just so I can actually have more alone time as well. And in terms of that service-oriented mission, like when I'm teaching and doing as I'm doing around the world, my general mantra is I want to get out of my own way. There's an energy, there's a source, there's a spirit that's moving through me that I trust more than any. And my personality's sometimes trying to catch up with where my soul's guiding me. And sometimes it's like, all right, dude, we need to rest. So actually when I'm here in Bali, I try to do more rest, which I've been doing. But to a man who's listening, it's like, find your why. And if your why is so that you can find daddy's love, like, find that love inside yourself, and then maybe you need to find a new why, or maybe that why is to find mommy's love. Okay, find mommy's love and then find the new why. Like, find that thing inside that you would do even if you weren't getting paid. You would do it, just because you love to do it. Like for me, working with a group, working one-on-one with people, having interviews like this, I did this for a long time in my life and didn't get paid so well. I get paid well, and I get to travel and teach and share. I'm still always, expanding and growing in what I get to do, but I would continue to do this no matter what. And, even sometimes when it's a smaller group and whatever marketing thing didn't work out, I still show up the same way if it's 5 people or 500 people. I'm showing up, and I'm showing up in love and support and service because I know that a simple one conversation or one way of being with someone can make a difference in their lives. And that's all I look at.
Beautifully put, brother. Thank you.
Hmm.
Well, we're going to be closing down quite soon. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge you. Thank you, Aaron, for coming on this podcast. Thank you as well for providing so much value, and just really honor you as a brother with whom I've shared many moments, and been with many retreats, and it's been really, really wonderful. And can't wait as well where the future takes us, and looking forward to many more moments like that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for holding point with this podcast and walking your world and impacting the lives that I know you do, and really honoring you and celebrating you. And it's a joy to have a brother like you in my life. Thank you for being who you are. Appreciate you.
Thank you, brother. Where can our listeners find you?
If you go to Instagram, The Soul Navigator, you'll find me there. That's kind of the merging of my worlds, navigating ships to navigating souls. So The Soul Navigator. If you go to my website, Aaron Kleinerman, which is just AARONKLEINERMAN.com. Or if you look up on Amazon, The Embodied Man, it's the only one there. And you can find my book, which is, it's on Kindle, it's on Audible, it's on all the things. So it's
a great book. I read it and absolutely loved it. Any offerings that are coming up maybe in the recent time that you would love to maybe just speak into? So many trainings.
Yeah. If you go to my website and click on events, you'll see, I'm in US, I'm in Europe, I'm down in South America, I'm all over the world. I think especially for this crowd, and for men listening, if you really want a deep journey into more advanced men's work, to meet the deepest edges, to go and to discover who you really are, into your body, and with other brothers who are also doing the same, the initiation journey, which you go to the initiationjourney.com. We have those retreats are happening actually without me now as well. So that's growing and expanding. We have, I think, 7 or 8 happening around the world this next year in many different countries and places. So you can find out more about those at that website.
Wonderful, brother. One final question I have for you. In 1 to 2 sentences, the reason why I call this podcast The Heart of Man is because the heart space was that area where I was most disconnected from my entire life. So I'm curious to hear what enlivens you most in your heart and what drives you at your deepest core.
So, what enlivens me most in my heart is ultimately love. And what drives me is to support both myself and others to awaken the wisdom of the soul, so that we as a culture, as a community, live in that vibration of love, ultimately.
Beautiful, man. I'd say we share a very similar mission.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. So for all you listeners, thank you for tuning in. I hope you got a lot of value out of this conversation with Aaron and I. And until next time, I'm wishing you much love. Thank you for listening to this episode. Your time and attention is truly appreciated. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for my upcoming episodes. And in case you know somebody who would find this episode helpful, I encourage you to pay it forward. Finally, if you've personally been receiving value from the show, one way you're able to support this podcast is by leaving a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Not only does this help more people find the show, but it also supports me in bringing more incredible guests on for the future. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and until next time, signing off.